The grandfather clock in the east corridor struck 3 times each chime, echoing through stone hallways that had witnessed 2 centuries of Blackwood rule. Marcus stood alone in the command center, shoulders rigid beneath his tactical vest, eyes fixed on the satellite feeds streaming across 4 monitors mounted to the reinforced concrete wall. Sleep had become a stranger 3 years ago, another casualty in a war he'd already lost. The leather chair creaked as he leaned forward, studying Border Patrol reports with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 12 years of SEAL operations in places the Pentagon still wouldn't acknowledge. Movement patterns, supply routes, response times. The numbers painted a picture his instincts had already assembled. Someone was organizing the rogues into coordinated units with military-grade discipline. His reflection stared back from the darkened screen, 48 years compressed into features that looked 52 on good days. Gray had claimed most of his hair, now threaded through what remained of the dark brown that Catherine used to run her fingers through during quiet mornings before duty called. 7 years since rogues had torn her apart while he'd been 300 miles away chasing ghosts across the Canadian border on intelligence that turned out to be manufactured. 7 years of knowing he'd failed the one person who'd trusted him to always come home. Then Elena. 2 years of something that almost felt like redemption, like maybe the universe hadn't written him off completely. 24 months of watching her navigate council politics with the same tactical awareness he'd applied to hostile territory. She'd been good at it, better than anyone expected, from someone who'd grown up in the quiet isolation of the Silvercrest estate. 24 years and 9 months old when the dizzy spells started, 3 months pregnant, just 3 months before her 25th birthday, when everything should have ended, according to the curse that had plagued her bloodline for 8 generations. The mate bond still ached in his chest, a phantom limb that sent phantom pains shooting through his ribs every time his guardia dropped. Severed bonds were supposed to hurt for weeks, maybe months. This was 3 years of slow bleeding, the kind of wound that never quite scabbed over because it had never actually severed, though Marcus hadn't understood that yet. Bootsteps approached from the corridor, measured deliberate, the gait of someone who'd spent enough years in combat zones to read threat assessment in the pattern of footfalls. Owen Drake filled the doorway, 45 years of hard living, carved into a frame that still moved like the SEAL platoon chief he'd been before Marcus had recruited him to run Silver Pine's security apparatus. His voice carried that particular flatness that meant bad news dressed in operational language. "Sir, we have a situation. Border Scouts logged organized rogue movements in Sector 7. Coordinated. Not the usual lone wolf bullshit." Marcus swiveled the chair, already pulling up topographical maps on the secondary monitor. "Show me the patterns." Owen crossed to the tactical display, fingers moving across the touchscreen interface with practiced efficiency. Red markers bloomed across the digital terrain, each one a confirmed sighting timestamp and scout notation attached. "Started 3 days ago. Small groups moving in staggered intervals. Classic bounding Overwatch formation. Someone taught them infantry tactics. The patterns were clean. Too clean for rogues who typically operated on instinct and aggression rather than doctrine. Marcus traced the movement vectors, his mind automatically calculating fields of fire rally points, exfiltration routes. Whoever was running this operation had military training. Real training, not the kind picked up from YouTube and delusion. Owen's jaw tightened. That meant he'd been holding something back. "Your brother wants you to deploy north. Says it's an urgent threat that requires the AlphaKing's personal attention." Marcus's fingers stopped moving across the screen. Garrett, Deputy Alpha for the past 3 years, ever since Marcus had retreated into grief and let someone else carry the daily operational burden of running a territory that stretched across 200 miles of Colorado Rockies. His younger brother had stepped up without being asked, had handled council sessions and border disputes and infrastructure projects with the kind of competence that made people forget Marcus even existed most days. The video call connected before Marcus could decide whether that thought tasted like gratitude or suspicion. Garrett's face filled the monitor, 42 years of Army Ranger discipline packed into features that looked like Marcus's might have before grief and guilt had carved their territory. Dark hair, still regulation, short jaw, still carrying that edge of certainty that came from never having failed at anything that mattered. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Brother, you need to lead this operation personally. Show the pack you're still their warrior king. Show them the alpha they remember." Marcus studied his brother's expression through the camera, looking for the micro-tells he'd learned to read during hostage negotiations in Fallujah. Nothing. Just genuine concern and tactical assessment, or at least a convincing performance of both. How many scouts confirmed the movements? Garrett glanced at something off-screen, probably his own tactical display. 4 separate patrols, independent verification. Whatever's organizing out there, it's real and it's heading toward the eastern settlements. We need boots on the ground yesterday. The logistics scrolled through Marcus's mind automatically. Team composition, equipment load, estimated time to deployment. 8 operators, full tactical kit. Insertion at dawn, sweep the sector, identify and neutralize the threat. Standard operation except for the part where he hadn't led a field team in 3 years, and the nagging sense that this felt too perfectly timed, too conveniently positioned. His reflection stared back from the dark monitor, older than his father had been, when a territorial challenge had put him in the ground. The question wasn't whether he could still do the job. SEALs didn't forget how to read terrain or coordinate fire. The question was whether the pack would follow a king who'd spent 3 years walking through his own castle like a ghost haunting the scene of his failure. Marcus's voice came out flat, devoid of the doubt coiling in his gut. I'll assemble a team. We deploy at 0600. Garrett's shoulders relaxed a fraction, relief bleeding through his professional composure. Good. The council's been asking questions, brother. They need to see you engaged. They need to remember why they follow the Blackwood line. The call disconnected, leaving Marcus alone with Owen, and the weight of expectations he'd stopped trying to meet somewhere around year 2 of Elena's absence. The head of security crossed his arms, expression carefully neutral. You want me to pull together the usual suspects? Marcus stood, joints protesting after too many hours in the chair. Harvin Cross, I want him on point for tracking. Pull 6 riflemen from the Eastern Patrol veterans, only no rookies who need their hands held. Full tactical load prep for 72 hours unsupported. Owen nodded, already moving toward the door. Then he stopped, one hand on the frame, voice dropping to something that wasn't quite subordinate, speaking to superior. It's good to see you getting back in the field, Marcus. The pack needs to see their alpha is still a warrior. Marcus waited until the footsteps faded before pulling up the satellite imagery of Sector 7 fingers tracing the rogue movement patterns that Garrett's scouts had flagged. Something about the spacing bothered him, too perfect, too textbook, like someone had laid out a training exercise rather than a genuine tactical operation. But maybe that was just paranoia talking, the voice that whispered from the back of his skull that everyone was lying, everyone had angles. Trust was the luxury of men who hadn't watched their mates die because they'd been too far away to save them. The eastern sky was bleeding pink and orange by the time he made it to the armory. Harvin Cross was already there, methodically checking the zero on his rifle scope with the kind of ritual precision that came from 28 years as a Marine Scout sniper. 52 years old and still moved like he could drop into prone position and hold it for 18 hours without cramping. Graybeard-trimmed military short-weathered face that had seen enough of the world's ugliness to recognize when something smelled wrong. He glanced up as Marcus entered, eyes sharp beneath bushy eyebrows. Heard we're hunting rogues. Been a while since you pulled field duty. Marcus began assembling his kit from the weapons rack: M4 carbine with AlphaKing scope, Glock 19 sidearm K-bar knife that had tasted blood in 3 different theaters. Been a while since we had organized threats worth my personal attention. Harvin's hands never stopped moving through his equipment check, but his voice carried the weight of someone who'd earned the right to speak plainly. Or maybe it's been a while since you had a reason to leave the castle. Either way, it's good to see you gearing up. The younger operators have been starting to wonder if the old man still remembered which end of the rifle the bullets had come out of. Marcus slammed a magazine into the well hard enough to make the point without saying it. Harvin just smiled, the expression of a man who'd seen enough flag-draped coffins to know that anger was just grief in tactical gear. The team assembled in the motor pool at 0538, operators checking weapons and reviewing sector maps under sodium lights that turned everything the color of old bones. Owen ran the brief with the efficiency of someone who'd done pre-mission planning in his sleep. Primary objectives, secondary objectives, contingency, exfil points, radio protocols. Standard stuff, but Marcus watched the younger operators hanging on every word like it was scripture. They'd been running patrols under Owen's command for years, while their AlphaKing had been filing paperwork and avoiding mirrors. The convoy rolled out as dawn cracked the eastern horizon, 3 vehicles carrying 8 heavily armed shifters into mountain territory where cell towers were sparse and backup was measured in hours rather than minutes. Harvin rode shotgun in Marcus's Suburban, scanning terrain through the window with the constant assessment of someone whose survival instinct had been honed sharp enough to cut. 2 hours north, the paved roads gave way to logging trails that hadn't seen maintenance since the last administration. Marcus kept the Suburban grinding forward, following GPS coordinates that led deeper into the kind of wilderness where humans feared to tread, and shifters felt the ancient pull of territory that had belonged to their kind since before the frontier had been tamed. Harvin's voice cut through the engine noise quiet enough that the operators in the back seats couldn't hear over their own conversation. "Sir, while we're out here, there's something I need to show you. Unrelated to the rogue situation, but it's been eating at me for 3 years." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "If it's unrelated, it can wait until we've cleared the sector." Harvin shook his head, still staring out at the forest sliding past. "It's about Lady Elena, her death scene. I've been running a private investigation. The forensics never sat right with me." The Suburban swerved slightly before Marcus corrected. Cold adrenaline dumped into his bloodstream, the same chemical rush that had preceded every firefight, every breach, every moment where decisions measured in milliseconds determined who went home and who got zipped into body bags. "She's dead, Harvin. I found the scene myself, blood everywhere, bear tracks, wedding ring torn from her hand." "What the hell more evidence do you need?" Harvin pulled a tablet from his tactical pack screen, glowing with crime scene photos that Marcus had burned into his memory through 3 years of nightmares. "Blood spatter pattern is wrong for an actual bear attack. Too uniform, too deliberate. Distribution suggests staging rather than violence. And the horse wounds I've seen, what happens when bears go after mounts? They don't inflict shallow, precise cuts designed not to kill." Marcus wanted to tell him to stop talking, to put the tablet away, to let the dead rest in whatever peace they could find. But the operator in him, the part that had survived a dozen deployments by never accepting convenient explanations, made him pull the Suburban off the trail into a clearing where the other vehicles could wait. The evidence laid out on Harvin's tablet told a story that contradicted every assumption Marcus had carried for 3 years. Blood spatter analysis is showing wrong angles, wrong velocity, wrong everything for the narrative of a surprise bear attack. Wedding ring positioned too deliberately, placed rather than torn away. Horse tracks indicating controlled injury rather than panic flight. Bear stomach contents showing no human tissue, no fabric, nothing that would support the conclusion that it had consumed Elena's body. Timeline problems stacked up like bodies after a botched operation. Bear killed by Marcus in his rage had been tracked backward to a location 3 miles from where Elena disappeared. Drag marks showed wrong angles for bear behavior, ending at a river where no blood traces continued into the water. And the kicker scattered reports over the past 3 years from mountain villages of a ghost woman matching Elena's description, always accompanied by wolves never fleeing from them. Harvin's voice stayed professionally neutral, presenting facts without interpretation. "I've been tracking the sightings, found crude shelters in the high country, recovered fabric samples that match her wedding dress. Found this 2 weeks ago." He pulled a medallion from his vest pocket, silver catching the morning light. The silver crest, family crest wolf's head, surrounded by crescent moons, gleamed like an accusation. Marcus took the medallion with fingers that had gone numb. His thumb traced the design he'd seen around Elena's neck on their wedding day, around her mother's neck at the ceremony before that. The clasp was broken metal stressed in a way that suggested it had been pulled free deliberately rather than torn away in violence. The surface showed scratches, recent ones the kind that came from being carried in a pocket or pack rather than buried with the dead. His tactical mind assembled the picture even as his grief screamed at him to reject it. Elena had staged her death. The question that mattered wasn't why survival instinct was reason enough, but whether she was still alive, still out there in territory that would kill an experienced operator inside a week. Marcus's voice came out flatter than he'd intended, stripped down to mission parameters. "If she's alive, she's survived 3 years in the Forbidden Mountains. That requires exceptional resources and skills. Question, why would death be preferable to staying?" Harvin met his eyes with the directness of someone who'd earned the right through blood and bullets. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. But sir, if she's alive, we need to find her. and we need to do it before. He glanced toward the other vehicles where 6 operators were checking weapons and wondering why their AlphaKing had called an unexpected halt. Owen approached concern evident in his stride. "Sir, we have a problem. Just got word from the castle. Garrett called an emergency council session. He's questioning your fitness to rule. Says you've abandoned your post to chase rumors." Marcus's jaw clenched hard enough to make his molars ache. The timing was too perfect. Garrett sends him on a rogue hunt that leads him into territory where Elena might be alive, then calls a vote to remove him while he's too far away to defend himself. Either his brother was the unluckiest man in Colorado, or this whole operation had been designed to put Marcus in an impossible position. The next words tasted like tactical necessity. "Owen, you take the team back. Handle Garrett's political maneuvering. Tell the council I'm investigating credible intelligence and will return within 48 hours. He turned to Harvin. "You and I track this ghost. We've got 2 days to find proof before the council votes to remove me." Owen's expression went through several calculations before settling on resigned acceptance. "Sir, if you don't return with something concrete, Garrett's going to have the votes. He's been building his coalition for 3 years while you've been—" He caught himself, but the damage was already done. "While you've been broken, while you've been useless, while you've been letting your brother do your job because you couldn't handle the weight of your own grief." Marcus watched the convoy disappear back down the trail, taking with it any illusion that he still commanded the respect that came automatically to an AlphaKing. Garrett had been right about one thing: the pack needed to see their leader engaged, functional, worthy of the loyalty they'd given his bloodline for 10 generations. Coming back empty-handed would seal his fate. Coming back with Elena, assuming she existed as anything more than wishful thinking, and forensic irregularities would raise questions about why she'd staged her death in the first place. Harvin was already spreading topographical maps across the Suburban's hood, marking locations where sightings had been reported. "She's established a territory roughly 15-mile radius centered here." His finger tapped a valley deep in the Forbidden Mountains terrain, so hostile that even experienced mountaineers thought twice before attempting it. Moves with seasonal game migration trades, pelts for supplies in one village during winter months. Smart operational pattern, minimal contact, maximum mobility. Marcus studied the map with the same intensity he'd brought to hundreds of mission briefs. Water sources, elevation changes, natural choke points where someone running surveillance could monitor approaches. She'd need a base camp, somewhere defensible close to resources far enough from human contact to avoid questions. Harvin nodded toward a cluster of caves marked on the map's eastern edge. "Scout reports mention wolves in this area, 20-plus pack, which is unusual, and every sighting of our ghost woman has her moving with wolves, not fleeing from them." The wrongness of that detail settled into Marcus's gut like spoiled meat. Wolves didn't adopt humans. Pack dynamics were iron law rigid about who belonged and who got torn apart for trespassing. But if Elena had somehow gained acceptance, that would explain how she'd survived 3 years in territory that killed experienced operators inside a week. They moved through the mountains with the practiced silence of men who'd learned that noise equaled death in too many hostile territories. Harvin read sign. Like some men read financial reports, a bent branch here meant passage within 12 hours. Disturbed pine needles there indicated weight and direction. The trail led higher into country where oxygen thinned and the trees grew stunted from wind and altitude. 4 hours into the track, Harvin held up a fist. Marcus froze, senses extending outward in the way that shifter genetics made possible even in human form. Sound, movement. Something large working its way through the underbrush with the kind of confidence that came from being apex predator in territory it owned. The wolf emerged from the tree-lined, massive, gray-black, coat-scarred muzzle that spoke of battles won. Alpha male, Marcus's instincts supplied. Old enough to know his business, young enough to still handle challenges. The animal's amber eyes fixed on them with intelligence that went beyond base predator instinct. Harvin's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Marcus caught his wrist, stopping the movement before it could complete. Hold. No aggression. More wolves materialized from the forest like smoke given form. 15. 20. A full pack moving with coordinated precision that would have made a Marine fire team jealous. They spread into a loose semicircle, not attacking, but clearly evaluating whether the two humans represented threat or opportunity. The Alpha approached to within 10 feet, head lowered slightly, but eyes never leaving Marcus's face. For 30 seconds that stretched like hours, they stood locked in assessment. Then the wolf's ears swiveled backward, responding to something beyond human hearing range. The pack turned as one toward the deeper forest. Through the morning mist that clung to the mountainside, a figure moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd forgotten what civilization looked like. Clothing fashioned from pelts, hair matted to something between blonde and brown, feet bare, despite terrain that would shred unprotected skin. Small frame, maybe 5'4", moving with the kind of economy that came from knowing every calorie mattered for survival. She stopped at the clearing's edge, one hand resting on the alpha wolf's shoulder. The mist shifted light, cutting through to illuminate her face. Marcus's world tilted sideways, breath catching in his chest, hard enough to feel like the beginning of a heart attack. Elena, 3 years older, 20 pounds, lighter scarred and hardened in ways that spoke of constant survival. But her eyes violet the same impossible color that genetics made rare as winning lottery tickets, the distinctive silvercrest trait that he'd memorized during 2 years of waking up next to her, locked onto his face with recognition that hit harder than any physical blow. The mate bond that had ached like a phantom limb for 3 years suddenly roared to life. Not reconnecting it had never fully severed, Marcus realized with stunning clarity. Just stretched thin enough across distance and trauma that he'd mistaken the pain for ending rather than separation. Now it flooded his system with 3 years of accumulated emotion, grief, longing, rage, relief, all hitting simultaneously, hard enough to drop him to one knee. Harvin caught his arm, steadying him before he could faceplant into the dirt. Elena stared at them, expressions cycling through shock, recognition, longing, and finally settling into something that looked like terror. She opened her mouth. Only broken sounds emerged, syllables that meant nothing, fragments of phonemes that refused to assemble into words. She tried again, visibly straining. More broken noise, desperation mounting with each failed attempt. Tears cut clean tracks through the grunting on her cheeks. Marcus forced himself upright, fighting through the mate bond's intensity to focus on tactical assessment. She'd lost language capability, neurological damage, psychological trauma, physical injury to throat or tongue. He took a step forward, hands visible and empty. Elena! The wolf surged forward protectively, growls rumbling low enough to vibrate in his chest cavity. Elena raised one hand. They stopped instantly, holding position, but clearly ready to tear apart anything she designated as threat. Harvin's voice stayed carefully neutral, despite the rifle now at low ready. "Sir, what the hell are we looking at here?" Marcus didn't take his eyes off Elena. Our Luna, alive, unable to speak, living with wolves who follow her commands. Each fact felt like loading rounds into a magazine, mechanical actions in a situation where training was the only thing preventing complete breakdown. Elena made a sharp gesture, frustration, anger, something that transcended language. She pointed to her throat, shook her head. Then she knelt, fingers moving through the dirt with deliberate precision, drawing, communicating the only way left to her. Marcus approached slowly, watching the wolves track his movement while Elena sketched rough symbols in the bare earth. Stick figure with long hair, her belly swollen, pregnant, then a skull. Death. Not death from violence, but death as destination, inevitability, something she'd been running toward or away from. More drawings. Wolf transformation symbol, but crossed out. Human figure remaining human, but with cracks spreading through the head. Time passing in rough calendar marks. And finally the transformation symbol again, but showing no return. A one-way journey into something that looked like madness. Marcus pieced it together with the same cold logic he'd applied to hostage negotiations, where one wrong word meant body bags. You were cursed, going to transform permanently. You left to protect me from watching it happen. Elena's nod was desperate relief flooding her features at being understood. Her fingers flew across the dirt again, adding details that made the picture clearer and more horrifying with each new symbol. The curse was supposed to trigger at 25. She'd been 24 years and 9 months when she disappeared 3 months pregnant, just 3 months before the activation date. Should have transformed into wolf, permanently losing all human consciousness, becoming permanent beast. But the pregnancy had somehow interfered, divided the curse's power. Wolf spirit died instead of forcing transformation. Human form remained. Human form, Except the curse had adapted, started eating her humanity directly. Language went first. She mouthed the timeline, maybe 6 months after disappearing. Memory was starting to fray now, faces and names slipping away. Within another year, maybe less, she'd be animal intelligence trapped in human body. Couldn't hunt properly without wolf form, couldn't function in human society without sapient thought. The operational picture assembled itself with brutal clarity. Elena had chosen slow death in the wilderness over transformation because she'd believed it would spare Marcus the horror of watching her devolve. And now she was months away from becoming something that would need to be euthanized before starvation finished the job. Harvin's radio crackled, Owen's voice tight with urgency. Sir, situation critical at the castle. Garrett moved the council vote up. Claims you've abandoned post-chasing delusions. Vote happens in 36 hours. You need to return immediately. Marcus looked from the radio to Elena, who was staring at him with the kind of desperate hope that made tactical decisions feel like choosing which limb to amputate. 36 hours to get back, convince the council he wasn't insane and prevent his brother from taking in everything. Or try to find some way to break a curse that had apparently survived 3 years despite Elena's best efforts to die before it could complete its work. His voice came out flat, mission parameters trumping emotion. Elena, I need to return to Silver Pine. Garrett's attempting a coup, but I'm coming back for you with resources to fix this curse. He paused, choosing words carefully. Can you write? She nodded, fingers already moving through the dirt to form shaky letters. No. Dangerous. Council sees cursed Luna. Garrett uses against you. Marcus pulled the field notebook from his tactical vest, offered it with a pen. Then we establish communication protocol. You write, I read. Tell me everything you know about this curse, how it works, who might know how to break it, what you've already tried. We have 20 minutes, then I have to move. Elena took the notebook with trembling hands, began writing in script that wavered between legible and chaotic. The story came out in fragments, discovering her grandmother's diary in the castle's hidden library 3 years and 3 months ago, learning about 8 generations of Silvercrest women who'd all transformed permanently at 25, reading Eleanor Silvercrest's final entries about choosing poison over transformation. The curse targeted wolf spirits, specifically forced irreversible shift. But Elena's pregnancy had created a stalemate baby, somehow splitting the curse's power enough to kill her wolf without forcing the shift. Now the curse was eating her differently, slower, but just as terminal. Language gone, memory fading. Within a year, maybe 6 months, she'd lose everything that made her human, while her body stayed trapped in human form. Can't shift to hunt effectively, can't think clearly enough to function in society. Eventually, starvation or exposure or a moment of animal panic that puts her in front of something bigger and meaner. The pregnancy was still there, frozen at 3 months gestation. Should have been obvious by now, 6 months along would show dramatically. But her belly remained at the slight swell she'd had when she disappeared. Time had stopped for the baby, some interaction between curse magic and biology that Marcus's tactical mind couldn't begin to process. His handwriting filled the margins with questions that felt simultaneously critical and utterly useless. Can it be reversed? Who knows about blood magic? What have you tried? Elena's responses came faster, now gaining momentum. Grandmother's diary said no cure existed. That's why she chose poison. No one knows she's alive except Marcus and Harvin now. Hasn't tried anything because she left specifically to die alone, spare Marcus the horror. Marcus checked his watch, 15 minutes gone. 21 hours to get back to Silver Pine, assemble evidence, convince the council that their AlphaKing hadn't lost his mind chasing ghosts. He scrawled one more message: stay hidden, stay alive. I return in 48 hours with solution. Order, not request. Understood. Elena stared at the words, then at Marcus, then at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. Finally, she nodded, took the pen, wrote 3 words that felt like tactical surrender. Go. Save kingdom. Marcus pulled the wedding ring from his pocket, the one he'd carried for 3 years, the one he'd found in blood-soaked dirt surrounded by bear tracks. He pressed it into Elena's palm, closed her fingers around the silver. Hold this. It's a promise. I'm coming back. The wolves parted as he and Harvin backed toward the tree line. Elena stood frozen, fists clenched around the ring, violet eyes tracking Marcus until the forest swallowed him whole. The mate bond stretched but didn't break as distance increased. It had never broken, Marcus realized. 3 years of thinking he'd lost everything when she'd just been too far away for the connection to feel like anything except pain. They moved fast through the mountains, burning daylight and lung capacity in equal measure. Harvin kept pace despite 52 years of accumulated mileage, breath coming hard but controlled. Sir, what's the play here? Council votes in 36 hours. We show up empty-handed, you lose. We show up with her. Garrett uses the curse angle to prove you're unstable. Marcus's mind was already running scenarios, discarding options that wouldn't work, building tactical approaches from the pieces that might. We don't show up empty-handed. We gather evidence present, facts control the narrative. Forensic analysis of the death scene, witness testimony about the sightings, medical documentation of what the curse is doing. Force them to acknowledge reality before Garrett can spin it. Harvin's expression suggested he thought that plan had approximately zero chance of working, but loyalty trumped skepticism. They reached the Suburban as sunset painted the western sky in shades that reminded Marcus of arterial blood. 18 hours of driving, maybe 16 if he pushed speed limits and ignored safety margins. His phone showed 6 missed calls from Owen, 3 from various council members, none from Garrett, because his brother wouldn't risk leaving evidence of coordination. The first call he returned was to Owen, whose voice carried the stress of someone fighting a losing political battle. Sir, where the hell are you? Garrett's telling everyone you've gone AWOL chasing conspiracy theories. He's got Lord Brennan ready to call the vote early. Marcus put the phone on speaker so Harvin could monitor while he navigated the logging road at speeds the Suburban wasn't designed for. Tell them I'm returning with evidence. Critical intelligence that couldn't wait. I'll be at the castle in 16 hours. Owen's exhale suggested he'd been holding his breath. What kind of evidence, sir? Because Garrett's already seeding the narrative that you're delusional. Unless you've got something concrete. Marcus cut him off. I found Elena. She's alive. Living in the Forbidden Mountains, cursed, unable to speak. I have forensic evidence proving her death was staged and witness testimony confirming her survival. That concrete enough? Silence stretched long enough that Marcus checked the phone to see if the call had dropped. Finally, Owen's voice came back, stripped down to something between shock and desperate hope. Sir, if that's true, if she's really alive and you can prove it, that changes everything. But Garrett's going to challenge the legitimacy claim she's an imposter, or that the curse makes her dangerous. You need documentation, multiple witness, verification evidence that can't be disputed. Marcus's jaw ached from clenching. Then start assembling it. Pull medical records from before she disappeared, dental DNA, anything with hard verification. Get statements from the scouts who reported sightings. Pull the original case file from her death. I want every photo, every report, every piece of evidence reanalyzed. And find me someone who knows about blood curses and blood magic. Harvin leaned closer to the speaker. Owen, you need to look into Garrett's movements around the time of Elena's disappearance. Check his communications, his travel records, his operational decisions. Something about this timing feels orchestrated. Owen's voice dropped to something that wasn't quite whisper, but certainly wasn't meant to carry beyond the phone. Sir, if you're suggesting the Deputy Alpha had something to do with the Luna's disappearance, Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel hard enough to make the leather creak. I'm suggesting Garrett sent me on a false rogue hunt that just happened to lead me into territory where Elena has been surviving for 3 years. Then he called an emergency council vote while I'm too far away to respond. Either he's unlucky or he's been playing a longer game than any of us realized. I need to know how he knew where she was. The silence that followed felt like acknowledgement of something none of them wanted to say out loud, that Garrett had seen Elena's disappearance as opportunity rather than tragedy, that he'd spent 3 years positioning himself to take everything while Marcus drowned in grief. They drove through the night, swapping positions every 3 hours when fatigue started making the road blur. Harvin used his tablet to compile the forensic analysis he'd been building for 3 years, timestamps and GPS coordinates and photographs that told a story of staged violence rather than genuine tragedy. Marcus dictated observations into his phone's recorder: Elena's physical condition, her communication limitations, the wolves' protective behavior, the frozen pregnancy that defied every medical principle he understood. Dawn found them crossing into Silver Pine territory, exhaustion, scratching at the edges of Marcus's awareness, like sandpaper against nerve endings. 12 hours until the council vote. 12 hours to assemble evidence, build a case, and convince 9 politicians that their Alpha King hadn't lost his mind, chasing shadows in the mountains. The castle came into view as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Gray stone walls that had weathered 3 centuries of Colorado weather towers rising above the valley like judgment rendered in architecture. Home, prison, the place where duty and responsibility had ground him down into someone who barely recognized his own reflection. Owen met them in the motor pool looking like he'd aged 5 years in the 2 days since Marcus had left. 45 years hardened further by stress, eyes carrying the particular exhaustion that came from fighting battles where victory meant surviving until tomorrow. Sir Garrett knows. Don't ask me how, but he knows you found Elena. He's already spinning it, mentally unstable, king-chasing delusions. Dangerous woman claiming to be Luna, curse that could endanger the entire territory. Marcus climbed out of the suburban joints, protesting after 16 hours of highway punishment. Then we get ahead of his narrative. Who's wavering on the council? Owen pulled up a tactical display on his tablet, color-coded markers showing political alignments. 4 solid for Garrett younger members who've been impressed by his leadership over the past 3 years. 3 solid for you traditionalists who value bloodline and experience. 2 undecided, Lord Brennan and Lady Morrison. Brennan's the swing vote you need. Harvin was already uploading his forensic analysis to the castle's secure server. Sir, we need expert testimony on the blood magic angle. Someone who can explain what's happening to Elena in terms the council will understand. Otherwise, Garrett just labels her dangerous and uses that to cement his case. Marcus's tactical mind assembled the pieces into operational order. First, secure a verification of Elena's identity using hard evidence that couldn't be disputed. Second, document the curse mechanics with expert testimony. Third, demonstrate that Garrett had been manipulating events to position himself for a power grab. Fourth, present everything to the council in a way that forced them to confront reality before Garrett could spin alternative narratives. The problem was time. 12 hours to accomplish what should take days or weeks of careful investigation. Unless he cut corners, took risks, trusted that 3 years of Garrett's competent leadership had left enough cracks in his brother's armor to exploit. Owen's radio crackled with incoming traffic. All personnel, the Deputy Alpha has called an immediate gathering in the Great Hall. Mandatory attendance for all council members and senior staff. Alpha King Marcus Blackwood is requested to present himself for questions regarding his absence. Marcus met Owen's eyes, reading the message underneath the formal language. Garrett wasn't waiting for the scheduled vote. He was forcing confrontation now, while Marcus was exhausted from travel and before he could assemble his evidence. Classic tactical maneuver attack. When the enemy is weakest, deny them time to prepare, control the battle space. Marcus's voice came out flat despite the adrenaline starting to burn through his fatigue. Then we go meet him. Harvin, bring your forensic analysis. Owen, pull Elena's medical records in the original case file. We do this now, we do it public, and we make damn sure everyone sees exactly what Garrett's been doing. They walk through hallways that Marcus had navigated for 10 years as Alpha King, past portraits of ancestors who'd ruled Silver Pine since before Colorado was a state. The Great Hall stretched ahead, medieval architecture, updated with modern amenities, but still fundamentally the same space where Blackwoods had rendered judgment for 2 centuries. Garrett stood at the center, surrounded by his coalition of council members, looking every inch the competent leader who'd kept the territory running while Marcus had been drowning in grief. His voice carried across the hall with the authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. Brother, good of you to return from your wilderness adventure. The council has questions about your absence and the wild claims you have been making. Marcus descended the steps into the hall proper, aware of every eye tracking his movement. Exhausted, older than his years, carrying forensic evidence and desperate hope in approximately equal measure. But still Alpha King until the council voted otherwise. His response came out measured, controlled, stripped of everything except tactical necessity. Then let me answer those questions, starting with the fact that Elena Silvercrest is alive. The silence that followed Marcus's declaration stretched like razor wire across the Great Hall. 9 council members occupied their traditional positions along the curved stone bench that had witnessed 200 years of Silver Pine governance. Garrett stood at the petitioner's mark expression, cycling through calculation, before settling on something that looked like concerned sympathy, but felt like victory being savored. Lord Brennan rose from his seat at the council's center, 68 years of tradition and protocol evident in every measured movement. White hair caught the morning light, streaming through the stained glass windows, casting his weathered features in patterns of red and gold. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd served under 3 Alpha Kings and buried 2 of them. Alpha King Blackwood, you claim the Luna lives. That's an extraordinary statement. The council requires extraordinary evidence before we can consider its validity. His tone suggested he'd already decided Marcus was delusional, but protocol demanded he go through the motions of listening. Marcus gestured to Harvin, who approached with tablet, extended forensic analysis queued for presentation on the hall's main display screen. The images filled the wall-mounted monitors, crime scene photographs from 3 years ago, blood spatter patterns highlighted with analytical overlays, trajectory calculations rendered in precise geometric overlays. Harvin's voice stayed professionally neutral, presenting facts without interpretation. Blood distribution at the scene shows characteristics inconsistent with genuine bear attack. Velocity patterns suggest deliberate placement rather than violent struggle. Spatter radius indicates controlled application from approximately waist height, not the chaotic dispersal expected from predator assault. The display shifted to show the horse's wounds shallow cuts, documented with clinical precision depth measurements annotated in millimeters. Mount injuries were strategic, designed to induce flight response without causing lethal damage. Bear attacks on horses typically result in massive tissue trauma, broken bones, catastrophic bleeding. These wounds were inflicted by someone with knowledge of equine anatomy and specific intent to create evidences of attack without actually killing the animal. Garrett's voice cut through the presentation with practiced concern. Brother, this is fascinating forensic work, but it doesn't prove Elena is alive. It suggests her death might have been staged. By whom and for what purpose remains speculation. He turned to address the council directly. My brother has spent 3 years grieving. Is it any surprise he'd grasp at inconsistencies in the evidence? See patterns that support what he desperately wants to believe? Marcus kept his expression locked down, refusing to give Garrett the satisfaction of visible reaction. Owen moved to the display controls, pulling up the next section of evidence, witness statements from 6 different villages scattered across the mountain territories. Dates times descriptions of a woman matching Elena's physical characteristics. Small frame, golden hair, violet eyes, that distinctive silver crest trait that genetics made rare as lottery winnings. Always accompanied by wolves never fleeing from them. Lady Morrison leaned forward, 43 years of sharp political instinct evident in her narrowed eyes. Witness testimony about mountain ghosts isn't exactly compelling evidence, Alpha King. These stories have circulated for years. Every grieving mate sees their lost love in shadows and strangers. Marcus pulled the medallion from his vest pocket, silver catching light, as he held it up for the council to see. This was recovered 2 weeks ago from the Forbidden Mountains. Silvercrest family crest passed down through Eleanor's maternal line. It should have been buried with Elena's mother 15 years ago. Clasp is broken in a way consistent with deliberate removal, not violent theft. Surface shows recent handling, not decades of grave soil. He set the medallion on the presentation table, metal ringing against wood with finality. I found Elena 3 days ago, living in the high country with a wolf pack that's granted her protection. She's unable to speak due to curse complications, but she's alive, conscious, and desperate for help. We failed to provide 3 years ago. The Great Hall erupted in overlapping voices, shock, disbelief, demands for proof. Garrett let the chaos build for 30 seconds before raising his hand, commanding silence through sheer force of presence. Brother, even if we accept that you encountered someone in the mountains, how can you be certain it's Elena? A woman who can't speak, living wild for 3 years. Couldn't that be anyone? An imposter? Someone taking advantage of your grief? Marcus had anticipated this angle, had prepared for it during the long drive back. DNA verification, dental records, physical characteristics that only our Luna possessed, documented in medical files that Garrett himself doesn't have access to. He glanced at Owen, who was already pulling up the archived records on his tablet. Lord Brennan's voice carried skepticism worn smooth by decades of political maneuvering. Those tests take time to process, Alpha King. The council votes in he checked his antique pocket watch 11 hours. Can you provide verification before then? Harvin stepped forward, military bearing evident despite civilian clothes. Sir, I can have preliminary DNA comparison within 6 hours using the rapid analysis protocols we established for border security. Dental matching can be completed in 4 hours using digital overlay technology. Physical documentation will be available within 2 hours compiled from the Luna's private medical records that were sealed after her disappearance. Garrett's expression flickered, surprise and calculation. He'd been counting on time being Marcus's enemy on exhaustion and limited resources preventing adequate verification. Now that advantage was slipping away, and Marcus watched his brother recalibrate strategy in real time. The Deputy Alpha's voice shifted, adopting a tone of reasonable concern that made Marcus's tactical instincts scream warnings. Even if this woman is Elena, and I'm not conceding that point, we need to address the curse issue. Brother, you mentioned curse complications. What exactly does that mean for the Luna's condition, for the safety of this territory? The trap was obvious, baited with legitimate concern. Admit Elena is cursed, provide Garrett ammunition to argue she's dangerous. Downplay the curse, get caught in a lie when the truth inevitably surfaces. Marcus chose the third option, tactical honesty that controlled the narrative before Garrett could weaponize it. Elena carries the Silver Crest bloodline curse. 8 generations of women who transform permanently at age 25, losing all human consciousness. She was 24 years and 9 months old when she turned 25 3 years ago, 3 months pregnant at the time. The pregnancy somehow interfered with this transformation, killed her wolf spirit, but left her human form intact. Now the curse is attacking her humanity directly. She's lost language capability. Memory is degrading. Within a year, she'll be animal intelligence trapped in human body. The council chamber descended into shocked silence. Garrett's face showed satisfaction poorly masked, as concerned Marcus had just handed him exactly the weapon he needed. But Marcus wasn't finished, which is why I'm bringing her back, to assemble the medical and magical resources needed to break this curse. We have experts on blood magic researchers who study generational curses healers with centuries of accumulated knowledge. Elena survived 3 years alone because she was trying to protect us from watching her deteriorate. Now it's our turn to protect her by finding the cure her grandmother couldn't. Lord Brennan's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone trying to appear impartial, while clearly favoring one side. AlphaKing, the council appreciates your loyalty to your mate, but we have to consider the broader implications. A cursed Luna losing her humanity. What happens if she becomes dangerous? What happens if this curse spreads beyond bloodline? What message does it send if our leadership is compromised by blood magic we don't understand? Garrett seized the opening with the precision of someone who'd been planning this moment for years. The council needs to seriously consider whether my brother's judgment has been compromised. He abandoned his post for 2 weeks chasing rumors. He returns claiming to have found a cursed woman living with wolves. He wants to bring her into the castle, into the heart of our territory, despite admitting she's losing her humanity. He paused, letting each point land. This isn't the behavior of a stable leader. This is grief-making decisions that should be governed by tactical assessment and territorial security. Marcus's hands clenched into fists before discipline reasserted control. Garrett had just deployed 3 years of patient positioning, the competent deputy who'd kept everything running, the reasonable voice questioning whether the grieving king could still lead effectively, the concerned brother, worried about Marcus's mental state. Every word designed to make removing Marcus look like the responsible choice, rather than political coup. Owen's voice cut through the mounting tension, flat and professional. Deputy Alpha Blackwood, did you or did you not send AlphaKing Marcus on a mission to investigate rogue activity in Sector 7 3 days ago? Garrett turned smoothly, expression showing appropriate confusion at the sudden shift in topic. I reported legitimate security concerns. Our scouts logged coordinated rogue movements that required immediate attention. Owen pulled up patrol reports on the display, red markers showing the supposed rogue positions. These reports, signed by scouts under your direct command, sent to you 48 hours before you presented them to the AlphaKing. Funny thing about these coordinates, they're all in the northern territories where the Luna has been surviving. Almost like someone wanted to ensure Marcus would be in exactly that location. Garrett's jaw tightened fractionally, the first crack in his carefully maintained composure. "Owen, I don't appreciate the implication. I sent the Alpha King to investigate security threats. If those threats happen to be in the same general region where some woman claiming to be our Luna has been surviving, that's coincidence, not conspiracy." Harvin stepped forward, tablet displaying new information. "Except the rogues don't exist. I tracked every coordinate in those reports. Found old scat cold trails, nothing indicating organized activity within the past 6 months. Someone fabricated those reports to create justification for sending the Alpha King into specific territory." The atmosphere in the Great Hall shifted like weather patterns before a storm. Council members exchanged glances, political calculations running behind their carefully neutral expressions. Garrett had positioned himself as the stable alternative to Marcus's grief-compromised leadership. But if he'd been caught manufacturing intelligence manipulating the Alpha King, that changed the equation entirely. Lady Morrison's voice carried sharp edges beneath diplomatic phrasing. "Deputy Alpha, these are serious accusations. Can you provide evidence that your scout reports were legitimate and not fabricated?" Garrett's expression hardened into something that looked less like concerned brother and more like cornered predator. "The scouts who filed those reports have since been reassigned to border duties. Standard rotation. If there are questions about their observations, I'm sure they can be recalled for questioning, though that will take several days." He paused, calculation evident. "Days we don't have if the council is voting tonight on leadership succession." Marcus caught the implication immediately. Garrett had either moved his scouts out of immediate reach or ensured their testimony would support his version of events. Classic operational security, the kind taught in Army Ranger schools and practiced by men who understood that controlling information meant controlling outcomes. But Garrett had made one critical error. He'd assumed Marcus would play by council rules, would accept that limited time meant limited investigation. 3 years of grief had made everyone forget that Marcus Blackwood had built his SEAL career on completing impossible missions with inadequate resources and hostile timelines. Marcus's voice cut through the political maneuvering with the flat certainty of mission orders. "The council votes in 10 hours. Owen, I want those scouts located and brought back for testimony within 6 hours. Harvin, complete DNA and dental verification within the timeframes you specified. Lady Morrison, Lord Brennan, I'm requesting the council postpone the vote for 72 hours while we complete full investigation into both Elena's identity and the Deputy Alpha's conduct." Garrett moved to intercept before any council member could respond. "Brother, you can't keep postponing accountability. The vote was scheduled, protocols were followed. You don't get to delay just because the outcome doesn't favor you." Marcus turned to face his brother directly for the first time since entering the hall. "You're right, I don't get to delay, but the council does get to decide whether they're making leadership decisions based on complete information or manufactured crisis." He addressed the council without breaking eye contact with Garrett. "I'm not asking for mercy or special consideration. I'm asking for the same thorough investigation you'd demand if anyone else was accused of fabricating intelligence to manipulate the Alpha King." Lord Brennan exchanged glances with Lady Morrison, silent communication passing between them. Finally, he spoke words carrying the weight of official decision. "The council will postpone the leadership vote for 72 hours. Deputy Alpha Blackwood, you will make your scouts available for testimony. Alpha King Marcus, you will provide complete documentation of your Luna's identity and medical condition. Both parties will present their full cases at the reconvened session." Garrett's expression showed fury for half a heartbeat before discipline locked it down. He'd wanted the vote to happen while Marcus was exhausted before evidence could be compiled, when momentum favored removal. Now he'd have to defend his own actions while Marcus assembled proof. The game had shifted, but it was far from over. Marcus left the Great Hall with Owen and Harvin flanking him, moving quickly through corridors that felt simultaneously familiar and alien. 10 years as Alpha King, and he'd never felt more like an outsider in his own castle. Behind them, he could hear council members gathering in clusters, political alliances forming and reforming based on this new information. Owen's voice dropped to mission briefing tone. "Sir, we have 72 hours. That's barely enough time to run the verifications, locate the scouts, and build a case. And that's assuming Garrett doesn't have contingencies we haven't identified yet." Marcus checked his watch 8 hours since he'd left Elena in that mountain clearing with wolves and a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Then we work the problem in parallel. Harvin handles forensics and verification. You locate those scouts and get testimony on record. I find someone who knows how to break blood curses. Harvin pulled up a contact list on his tablet, scrolling through names with practiced efficiency. Sir, there's a woman in the Forbidden Mountains, witch named Morgana Crowfield, exiled 30 years ago for practicing blood magic. If anyone knows how to break the Silvercrest curse, it's her. Local intelligence says she lives in a hidden valley 2 hours north of where we found Elena. Marcus calculated time and distance automatically. 4 hours round trip to find this witch, assuming she existed and was willing to talk. 4 hours that could be spent building political alliances, shoring up support among wavering council members, preparing formal presentation of evidence. Tactically leaving the castle right now was exactly what Garrett would want, gives him time to work the council position. His narrative ensures the scout's testimony aligns with his version of events. But strategy sometimes meant taking risks that tactics screamed against. Elena was losing humanity by the day. Even if Marcus won the political battle, proved Garrett was manipulating events, secured his position as AlphaKing, none of that mattered if Elena deteriorated past the point where curses could be broken. His decision came out flat: mission parameters overriding political considerations. Owen, you hold down the castle, keep pressure on Garrett, make him defend his scout reports. Harvin, run your verifications and document everything. I'm going after the witch. Owen's protest came automatically. Sir, leaving now gives Garrett free rein with the council. He'll use your absence to argue you're prioritizing personal matters over territorial security. Marcus was already moving toward the armory, pulling his tactical vest back on, despite exhaustion grinding at the edges of his awareness. Then he'll be telling the truth. I am prioritizing personal matters. Because if I lose Elena permanently and keep the throne, I'll spend the rest of my life as exactly the kind of broken king Garrett claims I already am. The Suburban felt like familiar territory after too many hours in political combat zones. Marcus drove north as dawn bled into morning, retracing the route that had brought him back to civilization barely 12 hours ago. Every mile took him farther from the castle and deeper into territory where Garrett's influence could manifest as a roadblock, ambush, any number of complications designed to ensure Marcus didn't return in time for the reconvened council session. The forest closed around the logging road like teeth, ancient pines rising on both sides in the walls of green-black that blocked out most of the sun. Harvin had provided GPS coordinates for the valley where Morgana Crowfield supposedly maintained her exile, but coordinates only helped if you could survive reaching them. This was territory that belonged to things older and meaner than shifter politics. 2 hours of driving brought Marcus to where the road ended and real wilderness began. He geared up with weapons that felt inadequate against blood magic, but better than facing a witch empty-handed. Glock 19 Kabar knife, tactical mindset that had kept him alive through situations where firepower mattered less than reading threats before they materialized. The hidden valley revealed itself, gradually elevation dropping into a depression sheltered by rock formations that would hide it from aerial surveillance. Smoke rose from somewhere ahead, thin gray line against darker gray sky. Signs of habitation, assuming the inhabitant was still breathing after 3 decades of exile. The cabin materialized from the forest like it had grown there organically. Rough logs chinked with moss, stone chimney producing that steady smoke, herb bundles hanging from the eaves in patterns that looked decorative, until Marcus recognized protective sigils worked into their arrangement. Wards, the kind that would make uninvited visitors reconsider their life choices before crossing the threshold. She emerged before he could knock, 65 years packed into a frame that moved with unnatural fluidity. White hair fell loose past her shoulders, green eyes sharp enough to cut. Her voice carried authority that had nothing to do with physical presence and everything to do with power that made Marcus's wolf instincts scream warnings about apex predators. AlphaKing Marcus Blackwood, took you long enough. I've been waiting 3 years for you to find your mate and come asking the questions that matter. Marcus's hand stayed near his sidearm despite knowing bullets wouldn't help if she decided he was threat. You're Morgana Crowfield, the witch exiled for blood magic. She smiled, expression showing too many teeth, among other things. Come inside. We have much to discuss and little time. Your brother moves against you as we speak, and your mate loses more of herself with each passing hour. The cabin's interior contradicted its rustic exterior shelves lined with texts that looked older than the territory crystals arranged in geometric patterns that made Marcus's eyes ache to track preserved specimens in jars that he deliberately didn't examine too closely. This wasn't the cluttered workshop of a hedge witch. This was a research facility focused on things that most people preferred to pretend didn't exist. Morgana gestured to a rough wooden table, began preparing tea with movements that suggested ritual as much as hospitality. The Silver Crest Curse. 8 generations of women transforming permanently at 25, losing all human consciousness. Your Elena was supposed to join them, but the pregnancy interfered, created a stalemate that killed her wolf, but left her human form intact. Now the curse attacks her humanity directly, slower, but just as terminal. Marcus remained standing, using height advantage because it was the only advantage he had. How do you know all this? Elena's been isolated for 3 years. The witch poured liquid into cups that steamed with scents Marcus couldn't identify. I'm a seer, AlphaKing. I dream truths that others miss. I've known about Elena since the day she discovered her grandmother's diary and made the choice to die alone rather than burden you. I've been waiting for you to find her, to reach the point where you'd be desperate enough to accept the price that breaking her curse will demand. Marcus's tactical instincts screamed that he was being played, that Morgana had been orchestrating this encounter from the beginning. But Elena was losing language memory, humanity itself. Paranoia was a luxury he couldn't afford. What price? Morgana set a cup before him, steam rising in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Blood curses require 3 elements to break. First, blood of the bonded mate freely given. Second, sacrifice of equal value to what the curse has taken. Third, destruction of the curse object, in this case the grimoire, Silvercrest, where the curse was first recorded. She paused, green eyes measuring Marcus's reaction. The blood is easy. You cut your palm, fill a bowl, feed it to the ritual. The grimoire I have here, I've been its keeper for 30 years, waiting for someone brave enough to burn it. The sacrifice, though, that's where most people balk. Marcus's jaw clenched hard enough to make his molars ache. What sacrifice? Morgana's expression showed something that might have been sympathy if it hadn't been wrapped in clinical assessment. The curse has taken Elena's wolf, her voice, 3 years of her life. Equal value means you give half your remaining lifespan. You're 48. Healthy alpha male might live to 90. You give 21 years. Age instantly from 48 to 69. Your body will remain functional. Shifter genetics ensure that, but you'll look and feel like a man past retirement age. Gray hair, loose skin, all the markers of time compressed into a single night. The words hit like physical blows, each one carrying implications that branched out into futures Marcus hadn't prepared for. 69 years old overnight. Council members seeing their AlphaKing transformed into an elderly man while his brother remained in his prime. Warriors questioning whether someone who looked 70 could still lead them in combat. Elena restored, but Marcus diminished the price of her salvation, written in every line and wrinkle in gray hair. His voice came out flat despite the calculations running behind it. If I refuse, Morgana sipped her tea, expression suggesting she already knew what he'd choose. Elena loses all language within 3 months. Memory goes within 6. Total mental devolution within a year. She becomes animal intelligence trapped in human body, can't hunt effectively without wolf form, can't function in society without sapient thought. Eventually, starvation or exposure kills her, or you have to put her down before she hurts someone in a moment of animal panic. Marcus turned away from the witch, staring at preserved specimens that stared back with dead eyes. The tactical assessment was brutal in its simplicity. Refuse the sacrifice, keep his youth and strength, watch Elena deteriorate into something that would need to be euthanized. Accept the sacrifice, age 21 years overnight. Save Elena, but hand Garrett the weapon he needed to argue that Marcus was unfit for leadership. Either way, Garrett won something. Either Marcus lost Elena permanently, or he lost the physical presence that made people believe an AlphaKing could still protect them. Morgana's voice cut through his analysis like a blade finding the gap between armor plates. There's one more thing you should know. The pregnancy is frozen at 3 months gestation. When the curse breaks, time resumes for the child. Elena will give birth in approximately 6 months. But the baby won't. She paused, weight settling into the silence. Carries an amplified version of the curse. Will transform permanently at age 13 instead of 25. Marcus spun back toward her, fury and desperation warring for control. So I save Elena by condemning our child to suffer the same fate, only faster. The witch met his anger with calm that came from seeing worse horrors than family curses. You save Elena now, then spend 13 years finding a solution for the next generation. The curse has been breaking people for 8 generations. Someone has to be first to say no more. That might as well be you. She paused, then added with clinical precision, and there's one more detail the diary doesn't mention. The amplified curse in your child will be strong enough that if you have twins, which is possible given the power the pregnancy absorbed, the curse will split between them. 2 children at 13, both transforming, but the divided curse may actually make it easier to break when the time comes. Nature's way of creating a weak point in the bloodline magic. Marcus paced the cabin's limited space tactical mind, trying to assemble options from pieces that refused to fit together. Accept the sacrifice age overnight, probably lose the political battle to Garrett, but save Elena and buy 13 years to cure their child or potentially children. Refuse, keep his position and strength watch. Elena dies slowly while their frozen baby remained trapped in stasis forever. His hands found the back of a chair, knuckles white with pressure against wood that creaked under the strain. Catherine had died because he'd been too far away. Elena had nearly died, might still die because he hadn't been there to help when the curse activated. Now he was being offered a choice that felt less like decision and more like selecting which failure he could live with. Except that was Garrett's voice in his head, the narrative his brother had been building for 3 years. Marcus Blackwood, the broken king, the failure, the man whose grief compromised every choice. Maybe it was time to stop running from that narrative and use it as weapon instead. He turned back to Morgana, decisions settling into place with the weight of ordnance locking into firing position. I accept the terms, my blood, my years, whatever it takes. When do we perform the ritual? Morgana's smile suggested she'd been waiting for exactly those words. Full moon, tonight. The ritual requires specific lunar alignment, and we're fortunate that timing coincides with your need. We'll need to return to Elena's territory, the Standing Stones, where she's been living. Her blood has soaked that earth for 3 years. It anchors the working. Marcus checked his watch, 14 hours until moonrise, 62 hours until the council reconvened. Cutting it close, no margin for complications, exactly the kind of timeline that separated successful operations from disasters. What do I need to bring? The witch was already moving through her cabin, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. The grimoire ritual components I'll provide and your Luna's consent. The curse can only be broken if she accepts the sacrifice willingly. If she refuses to let you aid yourself for her sake, the ritual fails and she continues deteriorating. Marcus felt cold settle into his chest. Elena had staged her death to protect him from watching her transform. She'd survived 3 years alone rather than burden him with her curse. The odds of her accepting his sacrifice were somewhere between slim and non-existent. Morgana seemed to read his thoughts, or maybe she just had 3 decades of watching desperate people make impossible choices. You'll need to convince her, AlphaKing. Make her understand that refusing your sacrifice just means both of you lose. You watch her die slowly while drowning in guilt. She loses herself, knowing she could have been saved. Sometimes the hardest part of love is accepting help when pride says you should suffer alone. They made the journey back toward Elena's territory with Morgana riding a mule that moved through terrain with unnatural sure-footedness. Marcus drove the Suburban as far as the roads allowed, then they hiked the final miles on foot, carrying ritual components that felt heavier than their physical weight suggested. The wolves found them first, Shadow and his pack materializing from the forest with coordinated precision that would have impressed Marcus under different circumstances. The alpha male approached within 10 feet, amber eyes fixed on Morgana with wariness that suggested he recognized power when he encountered it. Elena emerged from the tree line, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd forgotten what civilization looked like. She stopped when she saw Marcus' expression cycling through relief and confusion before settling on something that looked like resignation. Her eyes moved to Morgana, question evident even without language to voice it. Marcus pulled out his field notebook, began writing in block letters, that Elena could read despite 3 years of cognitive degradation. Found witch, knows how to break curse, requires ritual tonight at full moon. You will be restored. Speech memory, humanity. Pregnancy will resume. Baby born in 6 months. Elena took the notebook with trembling hands, read the words multiple times. Then her fingers found the pen, writing shaky but legible. What price? Marcus wrote without hesitation. My blood. 21 years of my life. I aged to 69 overnight. You get your humanity back. Our child gets a mother who can speak, think, teach. Elena's response came fast, anger evident in the pressure of pen against paper. No, you lose too much. Garrett uses your age against you. Kingdom loses strong king. I won't let you sacrifice years for me. Marcus took the notebook back, wrote words that felt like tactical necessity and emotional surrender combined. Not your choice. My decision as your maiden king. You chose alone 3 years ago. Now I choose. Either we do this ritual and both survive, or I watch you deteriorate while living with guilt that I could have saved you. Elena stared at the words, tears cutting tracks through dirt on her cheeks. Her hands moved through frantic writing, arguments piling up on the page. Marcus would look old, feel old, die young. Council would question his fitness. Garrett would seize power. Warriors would doubt their AlphaKing could protect them. Better she die than Marcus lose everything that made him effective leader. Marcus read each argument, then wrote a response that bypassed logic entirely. I failed Catherine because I wasn't there. I almost failed you by not looking hard enough. I won't fail you again by refusing to pay the price that saves you. Call it pride, call it guilt, call it whatever you want. But this is happening unless you can physically stop me. Elena's violet eyes held his, searching for weakness or doubt. Marcus let her see everything, exhaustion, desperation, determination, that went beyond tactical assessment into something that looked like the kind of love that didn't calculate cost-benefit ratios. Finally, she nodded slowly, acceptance warring with fury in her expression. Morgana had been watching the silent exchange with clinical interest. Good. Now we prepare. The ritual requires specific setup silver circle candles at cardinal points, the grimoire at center. When the moon rises, we begin. Marcus offers blood. Elena accepts the sacrifice. I burn the book. Simple in theory. In practice, the curse will fight back. It's survived 8 generations. It won't die quietly. They spent the afternoon preparing the ritual site at the standing stones where Elena had made her camp. Ancient rocks rising from the earth like broken teeth, worn smooth by centuries of weather. Morgana inscribed symbols into the ground using silver powder mixed with compounds that Marcus didn't recognize and didn't ask about. The wolves kept their distance, shadow watching with unease that suggested even predators knew to respect blood magic when they encountered it. Marcus's phone buzzed with updates from Owen. Forensic verification was proceeding on schedule. DNA match, looking positive, dental records confirming identity. The scouts Garrett had used for his false rogue reports were still missing, reassigned to positions that would take days to recall them from. Political maneuvering continuing at the castle council, members splitting into factions, Garrett working his coalition, while Marcus's absence gave him free rein. Harvin's voice came through scratchy over the marginal cell connection. Sir, you need to know something. I pulled Garrett's communications logs from 3 years ago. The day before Elena disappeared, he received encrypted transmission from an unknown source. Day after she disappeared, he sent encrypted response. Pattern continues, monthly check-ins for 3 years. Someone's been feeding him intelligence about something, and the timing suggests it might be related to Elena's situation. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place on Pattern emerging from what had looked like coincidence. Garrett had known Elena was alive. Maybe not from the beginning, but somewhere along the way he'd learned she'd survived and made the tactical decision to keep that information to himself. Let Marcus grieve, let the pack see their AlphaKing broken, position himself as the competent alternative. Then when the time was right, send Marcus into the exact territory where Elena was surviving and trigger the crisis that would justify removing him from power. The question that mattered wasn't how long Garrett had known. It was whether he'd been involved in Elena's disappearance from the start, whether the curse had been convenient accident, or whether his brother had somehow known what was coming and positioned himself to exploit it. But there was more. Marcus's mind assembled a darker possibility. Harvin pulled any communications Garrett had in the months before Elena's disappearance. I want to know if he had contact with anyone who could have told him about the Silvercrest curse, and cross-reference with anyone connected to our Uncle Samuel. Harvin's sharp intake of breath came across the line. Sir Samuel Blackwood, your father's brother who was exiled 15 years ago. The same. If Garrett has been playing a 3-year game, someone taught him how. Samuel spent 15 years swearing he'd reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. I need to know if he's been using Garrett as his proxy all along. Marcus filed that for later when he had time to investigate properly. Right now, the sun was dropping toward the western peaks, shadows lengthening across the ritual site, and Morgana was lighting candles that burned with flames too steady to be entirely natural. Elena approached as moonrise drew near, freshly washed from the stream, wearing simple clothes Morgana had provided. She looked more human than she had in the clearing 3 days ago, but Marcus could see the degradation written in her movements. Hesitation that came from forgetting how human bodies were supposed to navigate space, confusion in her eyes when she looked at familiar objects, like she couldn't quite remember their purpose. Morgana positioned them at the circle's center, Marcus and Elena facing each other with the grimoire on a stone pedestal between them. The witch began her preparations with ritual precision, checking moon position, adjusting candle placement, reviewing the words she'd need to speak in languages that predated English by centuries. Marcus's phone buzzed one final time. Owen's message was succinct. Garrett knows about the ritual. Hired tracker followed you from castle. Be ready for complications. Marcus showed the message to Morgana, who read it without changing expression. Then we proceed anyway. The curse waits for no one's convenience, and your brother's interference changes nothing about what needs to happen here. The moon cleared the eastern peaks as full night settled over the mountains. Silver light flooded the standing stones, turning everything the color of old bones and older magic. Morgana began her chant words that made Marcus's wolf instincts scream warnings about power that humans were never meant to touch. The ritual knife felt heavier than it should when Morgana handed it to him. Marcus didn't hesitate, didn't give himself time to reconsider. The blade opened his palm in a line of red that immediately began filling the silver bowl Morgana held ready. Blood dripped each drop, hitting metal with sounds that shouldn't have been audible over the wind, but somehow were. Morgana's voice rose in volume and intensity. AlphaKing Marcus Blackwood, do you offer your blood willingly to break the curse that binds your mate? Marcus's response came out steady despite pain radiating from his sliced palm. I do. The blood in the bowl began to glow faint at first, then building to luminescence that had nothing to do with reflected moonlight. Morgana held the bowl before Elena, who stared at it like it contained poison rather than salvation. Luna Elena Silvercrest, do you accept his sacrifice knowing the price he pays for your restoration? Elena's eyes met Marcus's, holding there for heartbeats that stretched into small eternities. Then she nodded, reached forward, pressed her hand to his bleeding palm. Their blood mixed, and the mate bond exploded to life between them. No longer just connection, but conduit, pipeline for power and years and life force itself. Marcus felt the transfer begin immediately, subtle at first, then building to sensation that felt like being aged and burned and unmade simultaneously. His hair grayed from the root's outward color, draining in wave that had left silver behind. Skin loosened across his face and hands, subcutaneous fat redistributing in patterns that added decades. Muscle mass decreased, fractionally joints stiffened, with phantom arthritis compressed into seconds. Across from him, Elena screamed first real vocal sound in over a year, raw and agonized. Her body convulsed as the curse fought back, refusing to release its hold. The pregnancy resumed with visible speed, belly growing, as 3 years of frozen time caught up in 90 seconds. Language centers in her brain reactivated like circuits coming back online after long power outage, neurons firing in patterns that had been dormant since the curse stole her voice. Morgana threw the grimoire into a ritual flames that erupted from the circle's center. The ancient book caught instantly, burning with silver fire that gave off no heat but filled the night with light bright enough to cast shadows. 8 ghostly figures materialized around the circle, women in clothing from different eras, all sharing features that marked them as Silvercrest bloodline. They screamed as the curse died, voices rising in chorus that spoke of pain and relief and freedom, finally granted after generations of suffering. Then chaos. Automatic weapons fire shattered the ritual's focus rounds, impacting stone and earth in patterns that spoke of professional marksmanship. Marcus dropped, pulling Elena down with him, as bullets carved through space they'd occupied heartbeats earlier. His aged body moved slower than muscle memory expected. Response times degraded by 21 years, compressed into minutes. Morgana's voice cut through gunfire with command that made reality bend. The ritual must complete. Hold them off. 12 figures emerged from the forest, mercenaries in tactical gear, weapons trained, moving with military precision. Garrett's contingency plan had just activated, and Marcus realized with cold clarity that his brother had hired professionals to ensure the ritual failed. Elena remained cursed, and Marcus never made it back to the castle for the reconvened council session. Shadow's pack erupted from the forest perimeter with coordinated fury that spoke of wolf intelligence, meeting territorial imperative. The alpha male hit the nearest mercenary at full sprint, 800 pounds of predator momentum, driving the man backward into his squad mates. Fang's found throat before the contractor could bring his weapon to bear, arterial spray painting the ritual circle's outer edge in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Marcus's Glock was in his hand before conscious thought and caught up with the muscle memory, but his grip felt wrong, joints stiffer, reaction time delayed by fractions that added up to tactical disadvantage. The first shot went wide by inches second, caught a mercenary in the shoulder rather than center mass. Age had stolen precision he'd spent decades building, replaced it with compensation strategies his body hadn't learned yet. Elena moved beside him with speed that suggested her restoration was completing, even as combat raged. She grabbed a fallen mercenary's rifle movements, showing training Marcus didn't remember teaching her, but Catherine had. His first mate had insisted every pack member learn basic weapons handling. The rifle barked 3 times, controlled bursts that dropped 2 hostiles attempting to flank the ritual site. Morgana's voice rose above gunfire and wolf howls chanting words that made reality shudder. The ritual flames surged higher, grimoire burning with intensity that suggested the curse's death throes were feeding the conflagration. Ghostly silver-crest women swirled around the circle's perimeter, their screams shifting from agony to something that sounded like triumph, laced with fury at being interrupted. A mercenary broke through the wolf perimeter rifle trained on Morgana's back. Marcus's tactical mind registered the geometry 30 feet hostile, focused on wrong target opportunity, window measured in heartbeats. His aged body protested as he lunged forward, speed diminished, but determination intact. The K-bar left his belt sheath and practiced draw blade, finding kidney space between body armor plates with precision that hadn't degraded with his youth. The man went down, choking rifle clattering against stone. Marcus retrieved the weapon, M4 carbine-loaded magazine, tactical light that would compensate for his degraded night vision. He braced against the standing stone's cover, began engaging targets with methodical efficiency that valued accuracy over rate of fire. Age had slowed him, but 3 decades of combat experience meant he could still read battlefield geometry better than contractors who'd learned their trade in corporate security rather than Fallujah. Harvin's voice crackled through Marcus's radio signal, weak but audible. "Sir, I've got Overwatch position 200 meters northeast. Counting 12 hostiles, you've dropped in 4 wolves, have eliminated 3. 5 still combat effective." Marcus keyed his radio with fingers that showed age spots he'd never noticed before. "Prioritize threats to the ritual. Morgana needs time to complete the working." Harvin's rifle spoke twice, suppressed cracks barely audible over combat chaos. 2 mercenaries dropped with the sudden finality that came from precision headshots delivered by someone who'd spent 28 years perfecting the art of long-range violence. The remaining 3 hostiles realized they were being systematically eliminated, tactical discipline fracturing into survival instinct. One broke for the forest. Shadow's Lieutenant Wolves ran him down before he made 20 yards, pack tactics turning retreat into fatal mistake. The second attempted to negotiate, hands raised in surrender, that Marcus's cold tactical assessment rejected. These men had been sent to kill during sacred ritual. They'd forfeited quarter when they opened fire. His rifle barked one center mass shot that dropped the contractor where he stood. The final mercenary made the smart play, grabbed a dead wolf as shield, and backed toward tree line with weapon trained on Elena. Voice carried desperate calculation beneath tactical training. "Back off or the Luna dies. I walk out of here, everyone lives. Simple transaction." Marcus kept his rifle trained, but didn't fire calculating angles and probabilities with mental processes that felt slower than they should. Elena was 6 months pregnant now. Restoration complete, but body vulnerable in ways that made hostage situations exponentially more complex. The mercenary had covered decent positioning finger on trigger with enough pressure that flinching would complete the pull. Elena's voice emerged for the first time in over a year, hoarse and uncertain, but unmistakably hers. "Shoot him, Marcus. I've got the angle." The mercenary's eyes widened, fractionally surprised that the cursed Luna could speak tactical reassessment of threat matrix. That moment of distraction cost him everything. Elena's rifle came up with speed that suggested muscle memory was reasserting itself faster than cognitive restoration barrel finding the gap between wolf corpse and human shield. The shot caught him in the throat, precisely placed to sever spine without risk of through penetration that might hit unintended targets. Silence descended over the ritual site, broken only by Wolfpack members checking their dead and wounded. 3 pack members down permanently, 4 injured but mobile. 12 human contractors dead or dying, tactical gear, expensive enough to confirm these weren't opportunistic rogues. Someone with significant resources had funded this attack. Morgana stood at the circle's center, grimoire reduced to ash that scattered in wind that hadn't existed moments before. The ghostly Silvercrest women were fading expressions showing peace that 8 generations of cursed existence had denied them. The witch's voice carried exhaustion beneath satisfaction. "The curse is broken. Elena's humanity restored, pregnancy resumed, bloodline freed. Though I suspect your brother will view this outcome as failure rather than miracle." Marcus lowered his rifle, adrenaline ebbing enough to feel the full weight of his aged body. 69 years compressed into frame that had been 48 an hour ago. Everything ached in ways that suggested arthritis and degraded cartilage and all the small betrayals that accumulated flesh inflicted over decades. His hands showed liver spots and prominent veins. Face felt looser when he touched it. Hair hung silver where brown had dominated this morning. Elena approached with steps that suggested she was relearning how to navigate space with restored cognitive function. She stopped 3 feet away, violet eyes tracking over Marcus's aged features with expression that cycled through guilt and gratitude and grief. Her voice emerged, tentative, testing vocal cords that hadn't produced language in over a year. "You look like you could be my father now. Gray everywhere, lines I don't remember. What have you done to yourself for me?" Marcus met her eyes with the same steady assessment he'd brought to mission briefs where casualties were expected but accepted. "Paid the price that breaks curses. You're restored, our child will be born. We have 13 years to find solution before the amplified curse activates." That's tactical victory by any measure that matters. Elena's hand reached toward his face, stopped before making contact like she feared touching would confirm the reality of his sacrifice. "The council will see this. Garrett will use it. They'll look at you and see weakness, age, a king past his prime, who made emotional decisions over tactical ones." Harvin approached from his overwatch position, rifle slung but sidearms still at ready in case remaining threats materialized. His weathered face showed respect mixed with concern as he took in Marcus's transformation. "Sir, we need to extract immediately. These contractors had radio equipment. Someone coordinated this attack. If Garrett was monitoring, he knows the ritual completed and his contingency failed. He'll adapt strategy accordingly." Marcus checked his watch. The motion felt different, now joints protesting movements that had been automatic this morning. 4 hours until dawn, 58 hours until the reconvened council session. Not enough time to rest, barely enough to make it back to the castle and prepare for political combat that would determine whether his sacrifice had preserved or destroyed his ability to lead. His phone showed 6 missed calls from Owen, 3 from Lord Brennan, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize. The text message accompanying the unknown number made his blood run cold, despite exhaustion. "Your brother sends his regards. The mercenaries were insurance against outcomes he couldn't control. See you at the council session, Garrett." Elena read over his shoulder, restoration of cognitive function, evident in how quickly she processed implications. "He just confessed to sending assassins. That's treason, attempted regicide. The council will have to remove him regardless of what they decide about you." Harvin shook his head, tactical pessimism trumping hopeful interpretation. Text came from burner phone, no way to prove it originated with the Garrett. Any decent lawyer argues someone's trying to frame the deputy Alpha manufacture evidence against him. Without the mercenaries alive to testify, it's your word against his regarding who sent them. Marcus began field stripping weapons from the dead contractors, searching for anything that might provide actionable intelligence. Professional equipment, minimal identification, payment structures that would take forensic accountants weeks to trace. Garrett had been careful used cutouts, and deniable intermediaries ensured that even if the attack failed, there'd be no direct line back to him. But careful wasn't the same as perfect. One contractor's tactical vest contained a sat phone with recent call history numbers that would eventually trace back to someone in Garrett's network. Another carried paper notes, operational parameters, rally points, exfiltration coordinates that suggested this attack had been planned with more than 48 hours' notice. Someone had known Marcus would find Elena known. He'd seek the witch, known the ritual would happen at this location in approximate time frame. Elena watched Marcus work with restored intelligence, assessing his methodical approach. You think Garrett's had surveillance on you for longer than just these past 3 days? Marcus bagged evidence with hands that showed their age in every movement. I think my brother has been running an intelligence operation for 3 years, while I was too broken to notice. Question is how much he knew and when he knew it. Did he learn you were alive after you disappeared, or did he know beforehand and position himself to exploit your absence? Morgana had been silent during the tactical assessment, tending to wounded wolves with skill that suggested veterinary training, mixed with blood magic. She spoke without looking up, from cleaning Shadow's leg wound, deep but survivable if infection didn't set in. Your brother knew Elena was cursed before she disappeared. I've seen him in dreams talking to someone about the Silvercrest bloodline, about how convenient it would be if the curse activated and removed the Luna from succession considerations. The implication settled like ordnance into Marcus's tactical awareness. Garrett hadn't just exploited Elena's disappearance. He'd known it was coming, possibly even encouraged it by ensuring she felt isolated enough to believe staging her death was the only option. 3 years of positioning himself as the competent alternative to Marcus's grief-broken leadership, all built on foundation of deliberately allowing Elena to believe her only choice was to die alone. Marcus's voice came out colder than the mountain air. Did he know about the ritual? Did he know what would happen if I paid the price to restore her? Morgana nodded slowly, tension still focused on wolf medicine. He knew aging you would undermine your position. Why do you think he moved the council vote to happen so close to when he suspected you'd attempt the ritual? He calculated that even if you succeeded in breaking the curse, you'd look too old and weak to defend your throne. Political victory through temporal manipulation rather than direct challenge. Elena's restored tactical thinking caught up with implications. Then we don't give him time to position the narrative. We return to the castle immediately. Present evidence of his involvement in tonight's attack force the council to address his treason before they vote on Marcus's fitness. Harvin was already coordinating extraction radio calls to Owen, arranging emergency transport and medical support. Sir, I'm calling in our fastest helicopter. We can be at the castle in 90 minutes instead of 4 hours by ground. That puts you ahead of Garrett's timeline, gives you initiative before he expects it. Marcus made tactical calculation that weighed exhaustion against opportunity. Arriving ahead of schedule meant catching Garrett unprepared, disrupting whatever political maneuvering he'd planned for the remaining 58 hours. But it also meant facing the council. While Marcus looked 70 years old, Elena looked 6 months pregnant and recently feral, both of them covered in blood from combat that would raise uncomfortable questions about violence and capability. The decision crystallized with mission-critical clarity. Call the helicopter. We go now. We control the narrative. We make Garrett defend himself instead of attacking us. Owen, I want emergency council session convened the moment we land. No delays, no time for Garrett to prepare. We end this tonight. The helicopter arrived 40 minutes later, military surplus Blackhawk that Owen had appropriated from territorial defense budget. Marcus, Elena, and Harvin loaded aboard with evidence bags and weapons that told story of combat survived through skill in wolves and luck measured in inches. Shadow watched from the forest edge as they lifted off Alpha Male's amber eyes, tracking the aircraft until distance made details impossible. The flight back took 73 minutes, dawn breaking over the eastern peaks as the Black Hawk descended toward the castle's landing pad. Marcus watched the territory spread below 200 miles of mountain forest that had belonged to Blackwood Line for 10 generations. His grandfather had held this land against challenges that made Garrett's political maneuvering look tame. His father had died defending borders against rogues who'd thought numbers could overcome tactical superiority. Now Marcus would fight to keep it, despite looking like he should be considering retirement homes rather than territorial defense. Owen met them on the landing pad, expression cycling through shock as he took in Marcus's aged appearance before discipline locked down reaction. His voice stayed professionally neutral, despite evident concern. "Sir, the council is assembling in the Great Hall. Lord Brennan attempted to delay until later today, but I invoked emergency session protocols. Garrett's there along with his coalition. They know something happened, but not the specifics." Marcus climbed down from the helicopter with movements that felt uncertain balance, degraded by inner ear changes that came with accelerated aging. Elena steadied him with hand on his elbow, gesture of support, that would read as weakness to anyone looking for confirmation that the AlphaKing had diminished. Let them look. Let them see what he'd paid to restore his mate and judge whether that made him stronger or weaker than leaders who valued position over people. The castle's corridors felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like returning to childhood home after decades away. Guards tracked Marcus's passage with expressions showing confusion and growing alarm. Their king had left 48 hours ago, looking middle-aged, and returned looking elderly. Whispers followed in his wake, speculation about what had happened, whether this was injury or curse or something worse. The Great Hall held the full council plus what looked like every senior pack member who could justify attendance. Garrett stood at the center, flanked by his coalition of supporters, wearing an expression of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. His voice carried across the chamber with practiced authority. "Brother, we heard there was an incident in the mountains. Are you injured? Should we postpone the council session until you've received medical attention?" Marcus descended the steps into the hall, proper, deliberately measured pace that refused to show weakness, despite body that wanted to sit down and not get up for several days. Elena walked beside him, 6 months pregnant and covered in dirt and blood, looking like she'd walked out of nightmare rather than 3 years of mountain survival. Harvin followed 2 steps behind, carrying evidence bags that would tell the story of assassination attempt and political treason. Marcus's voice emerged, older, raspier, but carrying command that had nothing to do with physical youth. "Deputy Alpha Garrett Blackwood, you are hereby placed under arrest for conspiracy, attempted regicide, and violation of territorial sovereignty. The evidence will show you coordinated an attack on sacred ritual with intent to kill your AlphaKing and prevent restoration of your Luna." The Great Hall erupted into chaos. Shocked voices, demands for explanation. Garrett's coalition moving to defensive positions around their leader. Lord Brennan hammered his gavel against the bench, calling for order that took 30 seconds to reluctantly materialize. Garrett's expression showed calculated surprise, performance art for council members watching. "Brother, I don't know what happened in those mountains, but clearly you've been injured or affected by something. You look 30 years older. Your mate looks barely human. Whatever you experienced has compromised your judgment. I'm calling for immediate medical evaluation and temporary suspension of your authority until—" Marcus cut him off with voice that carried edge sharp enough to draw blood. "You sent 12 mercenaries to kill me during a blood ritual. They're dead now, killed in defense of sacred working. I have their communications equipment, their operational parameters, evidence that will trace back to you. You've been running an intelligence operation for 3 years, monitoring me, waiting for opportunity to remove me." Harvin stepped forward, began distributing tablets loaded with evidence to council members. Call logs, operational notes, sat phone records that showed coordination with timing too precise to be coincidental. Forensic analysis of how Garrett's false rogue reports had positioned Marcus exactly where he needed to be to find Elena. Timelines showing how the council vote had been scheduled to coincide with the ritual's expected timeframe. Lady Morrison studied her tablet with expression growing darker as evidence accumulated. "Deputy Alpha, these documents suggest you had advanced knowledge of the Luna's survival and location. They suggest you deliberately sent the AlphaKing into specific territory while preparing political ground to remove him. They suggest you coordinated an armed assault during sacred ritual. These are capital offenses. Garrett's composure cracked fractionally mask of concerned brother slipping to reveal calculation beneath. Those documents proved nothing. Communications with unknown parties, operational notes that could have been planted, satellite phones that anyone could have purchased. My brother returns, looking ancient. His mate returns, looking half feral and pregnant, despite being presumed dead for 3 years. He's desperate to explain what happened, so he constructs conspiracy theory that makes me the villain in his personal tragedy. Lord Brennan leaned forward, expression showing careful neutrality that suggested he was genuinely uncertain rather than politically positioned. Alpha King Marcus, you must acknowledge how this appears. You left the castle against council advice returned, having aged decades overnight, with a mate who's been living wild for 3 years. The evidence against your brother is circumstantial at best. Without witnesses to the attack or direct testimony from the mercenaries, we have conflicting narratives and insufficient proof to determine truth. Marcus felt the political ground shifting beneath him, Garrett's counter-narrative gaining traction through sheer audacity. His brother had calculated correctly, even with evidence of conspiracy, even with proof of coordination. It would be Marcus's word against Garrett's regarding who had ultimately sent the mercenaries. And Marcus looked compromised, looked like grief and age had broken his judgment, looked like the kind of king who'd make desperate choices rather than pragmatic ones. Elena's voice cut through the political calculations, steady despite vocal cords that had been silent for over a year. Council members, I am Elena Silvercrest, your Luna. I staged my death 3 years ago because I discovered my bloodline carried a curse that would transform me permanently at age 25. I left to spare this pack from watching their Luna become a mindless beast. I survived in the Forbidden Mountains, losing my humanity piece by piece as the curse adapted to my pregnancy's interference. She paused, letting council members absorb information that contradicted 3 years of accepted narrative. Last night at a ritual designed to break that curse, Marcus sacrificed 21 years of his life to restore me. While we were completing that sacred, working 12 mercenaries attacked with specific intent to prevent my restoration and kill your Alpha King. We have their equipment, their communications, their operational parameters, and we have this. Elena held up her phone screen, showing the text message that had come from burner number. A message sent to Marcus's phone immediately after the attack claiming credit on behalf of Deputy Alpha Garrett Blackwood. Yes, it came from untraceable number. Yes, it could theoretically have been sent by anyone. But combined with the timing, the coordination, the perfect positioning of events, the pattern suggests deliberate conspiracy rather than tragic coincidence. Garrett's jaw clenched, tell that suggested Elena had landed hit he hadn't anticipated. He'd underestimated her, assumed 3 years of degradation meant she'd return unable to articulate political arguments or strategic thinking. But the curse's breaking had restored everything, language cognition, tactical awareness that matched Marcus's own. Lord Brennan exchanged glances with Lady Morrison's silent communication passing between them. Finally, he spoke words carrying weight of official council position. This evidence warrants investigation. Deputy Alpha Garrett, you will submit to questioning regarding your communications and movements over the past 72 hours. Alpha King Marcus, you will submit to medical evaluation to determine whether your accelerated aging has compromised your ability to lead. Both parties will refrain from territorial administration until this council completes its review. Marcus felt tactical ground stabilizing beneath political compromise. Not victory, Garrett hadn't been removed or arrested, but not defeat either. The council was taking conspiracy seriously enough to investigate rather than dismiss. 72 hours of suspended authority while evaluations proceeded meant Garrett couldn't consolidate power and Marcus couldn't be removed based solely on his aged appearance. Garrett's voice carried edges beneath diplomatic acceptance. The council's wisdom guides us all. I will, of course, cooperate fully with any investigation, confident that truth will demonstrate my loyalty and my brother's compromised judgment. The session dissolved into procedural discussions about investigation protocols and medical evaluation criteria. Marcus let Owen handle the logistics, his aged body demanding rest that he'd been denying for 48 hours straight. Elena stayed at his side as they retreated to the royal chambers that neither had occupied in 3 years. The bedroom felt frozen in time, preserved exactly as Elena had left it the morning she'd ridden out for that fatal hunt. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books still stacked on the nightstand, her scent still lingering faintly beneath 3 years of dust. Marcus watched her take it all in, restoration of memory, evident in how her eyes tracked over familiar objects with recognition rather than confusion. Her voice emerged soft testing language that felt foreign after so long. I remember this room. Remember mornings waking up here with you. Remember the view from that window. Remember feeling safe and protected and certain I belonged somewhere. Then I found the diary and learned I was going to transform, and all that certainty shattered into sharp edges that cut every time I tried to hold on to them. Marcus lowered himself into the chair by the window joints, protesting movements that should have been automatic. Exhaustion sat on his chest like physical weight demanding sleep that would probably last 12 hours if he let it. You made the choice you thought would protect everyone. Can't fault the tactical assessment, even if the conclusion was wrong. Elena sat on the bed's edge, hands resting on her swollen belly where their child grew. The baby. Morgana said it carries amplified curse will transform at 13 instead of 25. We saved me by condemning our daughter to faster version of what I suffered. Marcus forced his aged body upright, crossed to sit beside Elena despite every muscle screaming protest. We bought 13 years. That's 13 years of research, of finding experts, of assembling resources that 8 generations of Silvercrest women didn't have access to. The curse has been breaking people for 200 years. Someone has to be first to say no more. Might as well be us. Elena's hand found his fingers intertwining with grip that suggested she was still relearning how to touch without fear of hurting. You look 70, Marcus. Gray everywhere lines I watched appear during the ritual skin that's looser than it should be. The council sees this and questions whether you can still protect them. Garrett sees this and knows he's won, even if the conspiracy investigation fails. You sacrificed your prime for me, and it might cost you everything that made you effective. Marcus met her violet eyes with the same steady assessment he'd brought to mission briefs where casualties were expected, but accepted. Then we demonstrate that age isn't the same as weakness. That sacrifice made from position of strength rather than desperation. That leadership comes from judgment and experience, rather than how many years you can bench press. A knock interrupted before Elena could respond. Owen entered without waiting for acknowledgement expression showing urgency beneath professional composure. Sir, medical evaluation is scheduled in 3 hours. Darchen will be conducting full physical and cognitive assessment. Results will be presented to the council tomorrow afternoon. But there's something else you need to see. He pulled up security footage on his tablet, timestamped from 2 hours ago, showing Garrett in private conversation with 3 council members who were supposed to be neutral. Audio quality was poor, but lip readers Owen employed had provided transcript. Garrett was building coalition using evidence of Marcus's aging to argue that even if conspiracy charges failed, AlphaKing had demonstrated compromised judgment through his willingness to sacrifice physical prime for emotional attachment. The argument was effective because it contained truth wrapped in spin. Marcus had made choice that prioritized Elena over his ability to project strength. He'd aged himself knowing it would undermine his position. From certain perspective, that looked like emotional decision overriding tactical necessity. From another perspective, it looked like leader who valued his people over his position. The question was which perspective the council would adopt. Marcus studied the footage with tactical assessment that age hadn't degraded. Garrett's playing longer game. Even if conspiracy investigation proves he coordinated the mercenary attack, he's positioning fallback argument that I'm unfit regardless of his guilt. 2-track strategy, defend himself while simultaneously undermining me. Smart, adaptable, exactly what I'd do if positions were reversed. Owen's expression suggested he'd reached similar conclusion. Sir, we need to shift strategy. Stop focusing on proving Garrett's guilt. Start focusing on proving your fitness despite the aging. Medical evaluation becomes our opportunity to demonstrate that sacrifice made you stronger rather than weaker. Elena stood with movements that suggested she was still recalibrating balance for 6 months' pregnant body. Then we prepare for that evaluation like it's combat operation. Document everything, physical capabilities, cognitive function, tactical assessment. Show the council that Marcus's judgment is sound, his strength adequate, his ability to lead uncompromised by age that was deliberately chosen rather than inflicted. The next 3 hours passed in flurry of preparation that felt like pre-mission planning. Medical tests, cognitive assessments, physical capability, demonstrations that would show the council their AlphaKing had aged but not deteriorated. Dr. Chen approved professional and thorough documenting Marcus's condition with clinical precision that avoided editorial judgment. The results painted picture that Marcus could work with. Yes, he'd aged 21 years overnight. Yes, his reaction time had slowed fractionally. His maximum strength had decreased measurably. His recovery time had lengthened predictably. But his cognitive function remained sharp. His tactical assessment capabilities were intact. His leadership judgment showed no signs of compromise. He'd traded youth for experience, compressed into single night, emerged looking elderly, but thinking like strategist, who'd survived 3 more decades of accumulated wisdom. Dr. Chen presented findings to the assembled council the following afternoon. Marcus and Elena seated at the respondents' table while Garrett occupied the challenger's position. Medical data scrolled across display screens graphs showing Marcus's physical capabilities, before and after the ritual cognitive test results that demonstrated maintained function despite accelerated aging. Lord Brennan studied the results with expression suggesting genuine consideration rather than predetermined conclusion. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, has AlphaKing Marcus's accelerated aging compromised his ability to lead this territory? The doctor chose words with careful precision that suggested she understood political implications. The AlphaKing has experienced physical aging equivalent to 21 years. This has predictable effects on reaction time, maximum strength output, and recovery capacity. However, cognitive function remains within expected parameters for a healthy individual of his apparent age. More significantly, the aging process has not impaired judgment, tactical assessment, or decision-making capabilities. If anything, the experience has provided perspective that only decades of leadership typically confer. Garrett rose smoothly, voice carrying a concern that sounded genuine to anyone who didn't know him. Dr. Chen, you've described Marcus's current capabilities, but leadership requires projecting strength, inspiring confidence, demonstrating to potential challengers that the AlphaKing can defend his territory. How does a man who looks 70 project that strength? How does he inspire confidence when every mirror reminds him and everyone else that he sacrificed his prime? The trap was obvious. Dr. Chen could only speak to medical facts, not political perception. Garrett was arguing that regardless of Marcus's actual capabilities, the appearance of weakness would invite challenges that might not have materialized if he'd maintained his physical prime. It was argument that resonated because it contained uncomfortable truth. Elena stood before Garrett could press the advantage, voice carrying across the great hall, with authority that suggested she'd spent her 3-year exile remembering exactly how to navigate council politics. Deputy Alpha Garrett asks how aged King projects strength. I'll answer by demonstrating that strength comes from choices rather than appearance. Marcus could have refused the sacrifice, kept his youth, watched me deteriorate into mindless beast. That would have been easier path that preserved his physical prime while costing him his mate, his child, his honor. She paused, letting council members absorb the framing. Instead, he chose sacrifice, chose to pay price that restored his Luna, saved his unborn child, demonstrated that his people's welfare matters more than his personal power. That's not weakness. That's leadership that values duty over vanity. Lady Morrison leaned forward, political calculation evident in her narrowed eyes. Lady Elena, your argument has philosophical merit, but philosophy doesn't defend borders when rogues test our territory. It doesn't win challenges when ambitious alphas decide our leadership looks vulnerable. The deputy alpha's concern about perception isn't entirely without foundation. Marcus rose movements showing his age but carrying dignity that refused to apologize for sacrifice. Then let me address perception directly. Yes, I aged 21 years to break my mate's curse. Yes, I look 70 when I'm actually 48. Yes, potential challengers might see that and decide I'm vulnerable. He paused, meeting eyes of every council member in sequence. They'd be wrong, because age and experience matter more than youth and strength in territorial defense. Because tactical judgment wins more battles than physical dominance. because I've spent 30 years learning how to protect this territory, and those 3 decades of knowledge didn't disappear when my hair turned gray. He gestured to Harvin and Owen, both standing at attention behind the respondents' table. These men have served with me for decades. They've watched me lead in combat, seen me make decisions under pressure, evaluated my capabilities when lives depended on accurate assessment. Ask them whether accelerated aging has compromised my ability to lead. Harvin spoke first, military,